Hey guys, just a few quick warnings before we start. First, I will be swearing. The no swear is stronger than what they use in the series itself, but if that makes you uncomfortable, then I wouldn't recommend watching. Second, this is my first YouTube video, so the production quality probably won't be great. Still, even if my visuals and my audio aren't fantastic, I do hope you enjoy it because I think I have at least a few interesting things to say. And third, this is all just for fun. This whole video is basically just a compilation of me taking a fictional character way too seriously and probably thinking more deeply about him than the creator ever has, so don't take anything I say in this video too seriously. And with that, let's begin, shall we? So, TMF. I really like this show. But the thing about me is that when I get into a show, I can't just like the show in general. I need to get obsessed with one character in particular. And luckily for me, TMF gave me a lot of good characters to pick as my favorite. I could choose from a wide variety of characters who all had depth, who were shown to have complex flaws and issues, and whose emotions could be analyzed and picked apart for hours. And looking at all those options, I decided to like Liam instead. Honestly, I don't really remember why I decided I liked him so much, but now I'm stuck with him, and I gotta say that as one of maybe 5 people whose favorite character is Liam, I think he deserves more attention. Now, I haven't visited every nook and cranny of the TMF fandom, so I could be wrong, but from what I've seen, he's the least popular Jomi by far. He doesn't get that much attention, and when he does get attention, it's usually just because he's part of a ship with a more popular character. Of course, there's a bit of variety in how much more popular the other guys are compared to him. I don't think anyone will argue with me when I say Drew has massive amounts of popularity, possibly more than any other TMF character, and therefore absolutely more than Liam. Same with Jake, though from what I've seen, Jake has a surprising amount of haters. Damn. As for Henry, he's a lot closer to Liam in terms of popularity, but from my perspective, he's still a little more popular. Now, I'm not blaming anyone who likes those characters. In fact, I totally understand why they're more popular. Jake is the main character, so his complexities are easy to see, and it's easy to sympathize with him because we see what he does and we can hear his internal thoughts. While him lying to both of his friend groups isn't necessarily a good thing to do, you can see why he did it, and there's a lot of information to analyze in order to determine why he made the decisions he did. He's pretty interesting, and that's easy to see. Drew, similarly, also has a lot of obvious depth to him that makes him interesting, even upon first glance. His speech during the breakup alone has a lot of things to analyze, and in general his character just has a lot that you can unpack. Even if he acts in an unacceptable way, you can still tell he cares about Jake, isn't just a downright evil person without any redeeming qualities. His flaws make him feel a lot more human, and therefore more interesting. Henry is the most similar to Liam when it comes to his role in the narrative, but despite also primarily being comedic relief, he managed to, well, in my opinion, be better at being funny to the audience most of the time. Liam only really has one gimmick, and it's weird comments about women, which is, okay, humor is subjective, so maybe some people find it funny, but most of the people I talk to, including me, don't. Henry, by comparison, is basically more funny by default. His humor is also a lot more versatile and therefore more interesting as it tells us more about him. Liam really only has one running gag, that being his odd sense of humor. Henry, meanwhile, has a lot more stuff going on. He has this whole anime thing, more specifically talking about MHA a few times, but he also has his lettuce obsession, specifically Lettuce Chan, and also his crush on Leah. Other than the humor, though, starting in the later episodes, the creator really leans into making Henry the cute and silly one, which I think also serves as a point of popularity for him. But what I think really puts Henry in front of Liam in terms of popularity is that he's more often perceived as being less bad, I guess. Not only because of the more cutesy characterization, which sometimes makes people forget that, yes, he is still a bully, but also because of his reaction to Drew and Jake's fight, as well as how he felt before it. He's seen looking sad, which tells you he really does care about Jake, and that, combined with him not liking Zoe being so mean to a nameless character in the spinoff, does make it seem like the creator is setting him up to be some sort of anti-hero, or at least not a lost cause when it comes to becoming a better person. People love an anti-hero, so when they see a quote-unquote villain who could possibly get redeemed or at least be less bad than the other villains, they get really excited. Henry also seems to try and force less tension with an attempt at humor when he can, which gives him a little more depth as to why he's even the comedic relief in the group in the first place. So all the characters have pretty easy to see depth, and that makes them fun to think about. And on top of that, they also fit into little niches that a lot of people like. For Drew, I'd say it's that tsundere type thing where he's grumpy and pretends he doesn't care even though he secretly does. And for Henry, it's the comedic relief who jokes around to cover up sadness, both of which, in my experience, are really popular tropes in fandoms. Those characters are always some of the most popular. And Jake pretty much already is an anti-hero, which, like I said before, people love. So all three have really good reasons for people to like them. And then there's Liam. Liam, unlike the others, doesn't have a popular trope like that to fall back on, and all in all, his character seems pretty bare bones at first glance. Not helping matters is that poor Liam is nearly always the one who gets cut out of frame whenever there's not enough room for all the characters to be on screen. I'm not even joking, it's such a consistent pattern that he's the only Joey to just straight up never be featured in a thumbnail, because he gets covered up by Jake's head in episode 2 and then he just never gets another chance. It's honestly kind of hilarious once you start noticing it. Like, why? But to get back on track, him being cut out of frame a lot does mean we get less information on how he feels about certain things, and I do think it confirms that to some extent he's the least prioritized character-wise, which makes sense since Drew snapping needs to be built up in order to cause the Drake up, and Henry seems to be being set up for some sort of redemption, or at least to be more sympathetic. And all of this may make it sound like I think Liam truly is the least developed and most underutilized out of all the Jomies. And I mean, yeah, he probably is. However, that doesn't mean Liam isn't interesting, or that there's nothing to talk about concerning him. So why don't I tell you guys about all the hidden depths to Liam's character, and why exactly I like him as much as I do? I'm hoping to cover theories, analysis just based on the source material, headcanons, all that jazz. So let's begin. First things first, his character design. It's pretty basic, but I wouldn't say it's bad. Is his hair very stupid looking? Yes, but it fits his character so well that it's basically my favorite part of his design anyways. His color scheme did always strike me as a little odd though, because I don't really get why they would give him red and white exactly like Luke. Especially since, given Liam's general character, you'd think it would be blood red covering up white, which is a color associated with purity or innocence, rather than the other way around. Regarding the Luke and Liam similarity, part of me does wonder if it was purposeful. Luke is said to be popular with girls, and if Liam wanted to replicate those results, he might have tried dressing slightly more similar to guys like Luke. However, I severely doubt that was the intent, since like I said earlier, Luke wears red over white, whereas Liam begins wearing white over red in episode 5. Also wearing sweatpants, which by itself I have nothing to say about, but I do find it very silly and funny that in episode 5, when they're playing the soccer game, literally every other guy in the field rolls up their pants or changes into shorts. Except for Liam, I can only assume that this is because he is constantly cold, in which case, relatable. I also think it's a cute detail that freshman Henry wore white Converse, but stops by junior year, and Liam ends up wearing white Converse in his episode 5 redesign. I don't really know what that means, I just count it as another moment of them sharing a brain cell. All of this brings me to his red shirt, which has a video game controller on it, which doesn't seem too special until you remember that out of all the Jomies, Liam is the one we see have interest in video games the least. Drew and Jake are seen playing video games together, and they apparently have gaming nights too. Drew even bought Jake a Nintendo Switch, I mean, gotcha Switch, so they could play together, and a gaming laptop as well. So it's fair to say they both like video games. We're also told by Liam that Henry likes anime dating games, which Henry admits is true, and he's very clearly passionate about them since he gets annoyed and corrects Drew on what they're actually called. Liam, though? We've got nothing, which is just very ironic to me, because what do you mean the guy with the video game controller on his shirt was never once shown playing or talking about video games and was completely upstaged in that aspect by every other one of his friends? The best we get is Drew saying he talked about video games with Henry once. This leads to two theories. One, Liam isn't actually all too interested in video games, but needed a new look after giving up his scene phase and just shifted to a gamer look despite not liking video games as much as most of his friends. Or 2, he does like them a lot, it just wasn't shown. In which case, I propose that we absolutely need a scene of him geeking out about them or making a game reference or something. Because otherwise, he doesn't have a single hobby that we know about, unlike all his friends. Drew is 100% confirmed to like video games and soccer, since we see he has a soccer poster on his wall and we see him playing it. Henry likes watching anime, playing dating sims, and probably cosplaying, but he might have given that up in middle school. Jake likes video games and, of course, singing. Liam doesn't have a single confirmed hobby other than an implied interest in video games that he may or may not actually have. Which, in my opinion, is a tragedy, because I think that could be a really good second gimmick to give him, so he isn't stuck with just one while Henry has a million like before. Plus, I think it'd be really funny to have the audience think that Henry is super passionate and obsessed with his interests, but Liam's just way more chill about his. Only to slowly realize over time that no, Liam is just as much of a nerd as Henry is. He's just better at hiding it in his quest to seem really cool. Like, he'd love to ramble about gaming, but alas, talking about the intricacies of the Zelda timeline for hours is not what is expected of a stereotypical popular person. I'm also legally required to mention his freckles because as a freckles-having person, I could not ask for better representation. I'm so happy he gained more in the spin-off redesign. That's pretty much all I had to say about his design. All in all, it's pretty good, even if I think the video game shirt does leave you wondering if liking video games was supposed to be a bigger part of his personality. Honestly, I'm having a pretty hard time with writing this section because Liam's personality is not that hard to understand. Compared to some other characters, I think his core traits are pretty obvious. He's girl-obsessed, generally pretty chill, at least compared to Henry, and smug about basically everything. On a surface level, he's very easy to understand. I do think there are more layers to him, but to your average viewer, that's it. That's his whole character. But his personality did change a bit as the season went on, more noticeably than most other characters. Honestly, I think that if Liam from late season episodes was the same Liam that debuted in the first few, he might be more popular. But as is, in the early episodes, Liam only had one trait, that being his running gag of making vaguely misogynistic comments and/or talking about how women older than him are hot, which, in my subjective opinion, is not funny, just uncomfortable. I've tried to write out a more objective reason for why his jokes don't work a few times now, and after some thought, I've come to this conclusion. That this part of Liam's character wasn't working because it is completely incompatible with the role Liam plays in the story. Liam saying Stacy's mom is hot isn't funny on its own. It's only funny because of the shock value and the music reference, and even then it's still a little uncomfortable. Shock value doesn't last if Liam makes the same joke every time he's on screen. And given that he actually needs to be there for the plot a lot, it's simply impossible for the humor to sustain itself after the first time it happens. As such, Liam's comments get progressively more uncomfortable the longer he makes them, and any comedy in the situation is completely lost very quickly. And since that was Liam's entire character at that point in the series, he becomes basically unbearable for the following episodes. Not helping matters is that unlike most gag characters, the audience is supposed to take Liam seriously to some extent, given that he's an antagonistic force that greatly impacts the protagonist, and that makes it a lot harder to not put his comments in a more serious light, since the audience is encouraged to view the other things Liam says as legitimately harmful. With the way it was being implemented, the only possible way his humor could have ever worked would have been to keep his screen time extremely limited and have him be not at all plot relevant or a threat by any means, which just doesn't work for Liam's role in the story. Though in my opinion, even that solution only goes for some of his lines. I still think some of them aren't even funny in the first place, but whatever. In a series like TMF, first impressions are important, and I don't think it's unfair of me to say that Liam messed his up. Majorly. If these first few episodes were someone's reason for disliking him, I wouldn't blame them. I won't deny it. It's bad. It's not fun to watch. It's the worst part about his character. But the thing is, it doesn't stay like that. I heard that around episode 5, the series got rewritten, and you can definitely feel it in Liam's character. His sense of humor gets scaled back exponentially, and while it's still present, it being scaled back so much makes it a lot less uncomfortable, and sometimes actually funny. Liam saying, "What, were they making out?" in episode 8 when Jake talks about seeing Sean and Jay-Z was one of the funniest moments in the series to me. This change makes Liam come off a lot less, pervy, and a lot more comedically blunt and honest, which I think was exactly the change he needed. Because even back in the early episodes, Liam did come off very straightforward and practical, insisting Jake should just ask out Daisy instead of doing this big convoluted plan of his. And I think having his jokes come off as him not bothering to filter his words and just getting straight to the point and saying the first thing that comes to mind, not caring if it sounds a bit vulgar, comes a lot funnier than whatever was happening before, especially now that the jokes are less extreme and don't happen as often. Toning him back was definitely the right move, and I hope they stick with it. Of course, toning Liam back does come with the small con that Liam ends up paling in comparison to Henry, who really only gets more energetic and bombastic as the show goes on, but I do think it's worth the cost. Especially since it helps emphasize another large part of his personality, the fact that this man is the biggest follower you'll ever meet. It sounds like I'm exaggerating, but no. Whenever the Jomies start being assholes to the music club, Liam is never once the first one to say anything. Drew or Henry are always the first to speak. Drew usually instigates, Henry escalates, and Liam follows after that. There are a few good examples of this, such as when the Jomies invade the music room and Liam only joins in on messing around with the instruments after Henry has the idea. Or, an even better example, when Drew starts making fun of the club, Henry calls Haley Jake's girlfriend, and Liam, instead of thinking of his own insult, just straight up copies Henry's and calls Luke Xander's boyfriend. Or, for something more plot relevant, when all the Jomies are peer pressuring Jake into bad-mouthing the club, Liam is the last one to make up his mind and agree with the majority, only doing so after Henry agrees and literally beginning his opinion with, "Henry's right." He's quite obviously following Henry's lead here. But him being a follower doesn't just end at the bullying stuff, it applies to pretty much everything he does. He's following someone else's actions or words near constantly, and it honestly becomes a little funny once you notice how often it happens. The funniest instance of him not saying anything first in the scene, even when it makes perfect sense, is probably when Jake apologizes to Liam in episode 5 for messing up the soccer game, and Liam just silently stares at him in a silent rage while Drew does the talking. Really, the only character Liam ever seems to want to start conversations with is Henry, which would make sense since they've known each other for likely 5 or more years by the time season 1 happens. I think that while Liam is generally confident, he doesn't think quite as independently as Drew or Henry, and seems to prefer the safety of doing whatever is deemed socially acceptable. But I don't by any means want this to come off as me claiming Liam is super shy or something, because I don't think that's true. Like I said, he is confident, but he's a little more socially conscious than, say, Henry. Henry is basically the pinnacle of confidence. He's not afraid to be loud or to say what he thinks, showing passion for interest to others, even when those interests aren't conventional, and even making fun of Drew more than the other guys ever do. Hell, this man started singing Justin Bieber at the top of his lungs in the middle of a crowded cafeteria without shame. Not to mention that even after being rejected plenty of times, he still thinks he has a chance with Leah. He does not. Liam, meanwhile, isn't quite as eager to disregard what everyone around him thinks. He doesn't talk about his niche interests as much as Henry does, and isn't as quick to voice an opinion at times. One interesting moment that kind of shows what I'm talking about is back in the flashback to freshman year, where Henry says Liam had a scene phase, which on its own is an odd piece of backstory to give to your character who makes fun of people for doing things that aren't socially conventional. So you're already wondering if the circumstances for which he gave it up are really just him growing out of it, or if it was actually from social pressure. And Liam's response only increases those suspicions. He tells Henry that he doesn't want him showing the pictures because no girl would ever look at him the same. He notably does not say that he doesn't like the pictures because he himself thinks they're cringy, but instead because he dreads how other people's perception of him would change. Which makes you wonder whether he stopped dressing scene because he decided it was cringe, or if he did it because other people told him it was. With the little information we have, my bets are on the former, but we'll probably never know. Honestly, I think the biggest misconception about Liam is that he doesn't care about Jake as much as Henry or Drew do. However, this is not true and is slander that I will not tolerate any longer. Liam does care about Jake. Liam has been his friend for years, just like Henry and Drew have been, and I feel like since Drew and Jake's relationship is the centerpiece to the Drake-up in episode 11, people are always way more likely to notice that Drew did and still does care about Jake, and that you can't just suddenly cut someone you've been friends with off like that and never care or think about them again, even if Drew pretends that he can. And since Henry was visibly sad after they started leaving, it's also easy to assume that he still cares about Jake and does not want to leave him behind. But Liam does not have the same plot relevance as Drew, nor the obvious emotional response Henry did. So the chances are way higher that in any piece of fan content you look at, he will not be one of the people who, secretly or not, misses Jake. And people can do what they want, and I won't stop them. But that really bothers me sometimes, because just like Drew can't cut Jake off and never care about him again, neither can Liam. Liam is laid back and not very emotional. This in and of itself isn't a problem, but it does mean that proving he cares is a little harder since it's not as obvious. You see, in a strange roundabout way, the overly controlling tendencies that drove Jake away from Drew end up proving how much Drew cares about him. Drew's protectiveness over Jake, seen with him claiming the club is using Jake and wanting Jake to always spend time with him instead, proves he wants Jake around and that he doesn't want Jake taken advantage of by other people. We see this as far back as freshman year when Drew told off one of Jake's former bullies and protected him from any further harassment. Then there's Henry. Henry's obvious emotional reactions to things like Jake liking the same things he did freshman year, always calling him Jakey in an affectionate tone, wearing Jake's jacket for whatever reason, and, of course, his sadness at leaving Jake behind are all obvious signs to Henry being close to and caring about Jake as well. And Liam has neither of those things. He's not controlling, even if he clearly doesn't think hanging out with the club is a good idea. He still seems convinced that Jake's only doing it for Daisy and is just putting up with the club members if his "is this what you have to put up with all the time, Jake?" line is anything to go by, and he doesn't want to see his friend unhappy. But even with that opinion, he still lets Jake do what he wants and lets him hang out with them without too much pushback other than a few comments. But this lack of pushback does not mean Liam doesn't care about him. It just means that he believes Jake has autonomy as a person and can do what he wants. But that doesn't mean Liam won't judge him for it. Liam's also not as outwardly emotional about Jake either, but guess what? He doesn't need to be in order for us to be shown pretty plainly that Liam is good friends with Jake and as such, trusts and has faith in him. In episode 9, Henry and Liam make a bet as to whether or not Jake will ditch them, and out of the two of them, Liam is the one who wins the bet because he believed Jake would come back for them. He has a positive view of Jake and doesn't think Jake would ditch his friends without telling them straight up that he couldn't hang out with them. Henry, for whatever reason, does not share that opinion. Probably because Jake had been ditching them for questionable reasons pretty often at that point. But my point is, Liam likes and trusts Jake enough to think that Jake wouldn't ditch them. So they were definitely very good, close friends, just like Henry and Drew were both also good friends with Jake. Based off of this, going into the Drake-up, Henry seems to have already been growing a little more distant with Jake and doesn't have the highest view of him at the moment, whereas Liam's view of Jake has suffered a bit less. Why does Liam seem to have more faith in Jake than the others? Well, there are a few possible reasons it could be, and I won't go too into it, but the bottom line is Liam trusts Jake, possibly more than Drew and Henry do at that point. Drew, Henry, hell, even Leah, who has a crush on the guy, all believe that the chances of Jake showing up that day are slim, and Liam is really the only one who believes in his word. Something interesting that I don't see pointed out too often is that Jake directly acknowledges that deep down, Drew knew Jake wasn't doing all of this for Daisy, and that's why he fought so hard to keep Jake by his side and went as far as to believe Haley was manipulating him. Liam, meanwhile, has always kept talk of Jake's involvement with the music club about Daisy. Whenever he voices complaints about Jake's plan, it's always about how it's an inefficient way to ask Daisy out. Never some made-up bullcrap about Haley being a manipulator. When he joins in with the peer pressuring of Jake in episode 9, it's to say that Jake doesn't need to be in the club if he can't get with Daisy. This makes it seem like Liam's resistance to Jake hanging out with the club comes more from genuine ignorance than insecurity, and he doesn't feel the need to villainize Haley because he doesn't view her as a threat to their friendship like Drew does. Drew, on some level, knew this wasn't all about Daisy. Liam did not. Why? Because Jake told them that the reason he was doing this was because of Daisy, and Liam bought it. Because Liam trusts Jake. Liam doesn't think Jake would lie to him like that. He doesn't think Jake would say he's going to hang out with them only to ditch them. He doesn't think Jake would purposely avoid them and figures he's only doing it accidentally because he's distracted. Liam and Jake were good friends, enough so that Liam would believe an obvious lie even when the truth was right in front of his face. TLDW, Liam cares about Jake, and I'm tired of people pretending that he doesn't. Or at least that he doesn't care about him as much as Henry or Drew did. Because he does. He cares and trusts him so much. Like, he obviously cares about him. He checks up on him and everything. Why did people get the impression that he didn't care as much? I'm so confused. As much as my Liam bias makes me want to say that Liam is the closest to Drew other than Jake, I'm actually not too sure that's the case. I think that out of Henry and Liam, they're probably of about equal closeness to Drew, with Henry possibly being a little closer to him. This is for a few reasons. The most surface level being that Henry is usually the one who just stands closer to Drew, especially during important moments. But besides that, he's usually the first to back Drew up on most things, including how he agreed with Drew's assessment about how Jake should leave the music club before Liam did. And he also just seems, more comfortable around Drew most of the time, meaning a bit more comfortable annoying him or approaching him when he's mad. During the breakup, Henry is the one who tries to talk Drew down, with Liam standing back and looking a bit panicked at Henry daring to do so. Though that might just connect back to Liam being a follower afraid to step up and intervene when that might make Drew or Jake mad at him. There's also the fact that it feels like Henry just interacts with Drew more in general. You'd be surprised watching Liam's scenes back to back just how little he talks to Drew directly. Like, he never once talks to Drew specifically until episode 5, nearly halfway through the series. It would be halfway through the series if episode 6 didn't get cut in half. Henry, meanwhile, gets a lot more chances to interact with him, making it seem like they're a little closer, especially since Henry's lines to Drew are a bit more entertaining, and so their dynamic just becomes more memorable as a result. Drew and Liam's dynamic fades a little in comparison, and since Liam doesn't tease him as much, it sort of comes off as Drew liking Liam just because he's agreeable more than anything else. Quick side note, this is why it shocks me that Drenry isn't as popular as Dream is, at least from what I've seen, because the Drenry dynamic is shown to be really entertaining, and Henry seems more confident in actually communicating with Drew, and hell, he even makes Drew blush, which not even Jake manages to do, let alone Liam. Like, Drenry has that flirty ex-tsundere ship dynamic fandoms seem to love, so it's just really surprising to me that Dream seems more popular. I mean, I'm biased because Dream is my least favorite Liam ship by far, but still, the Drenry dynamic is so good, I'm flabbergasted that it doesn't get more attention. But to get back on track, when Liam does actually talk to Drew, it seems like Drew doesn't mind his company. I generally don't have nearly as much to say about Liam and Drew's relationship as I did Liam and Jake's, because it's pretty cut and dry. They've been best friends for years, and they seem to get along fairly well, even if Drew gets annoyed or weirded out by him sometimes. Honestly, out of all of Liam's friendships, him and Henry are probably the most straightforward out of all of them. Liam and Henry have clearly been best friends for a really long time since they know each other so well and seem to pretty constantly be on the same wavelength. Liam even literally reads Henry's mind in order to finish a sentence once. It's clear they're the ones out of the group who've been together the longest, even before they met Drew. They both know exactly how to press each other's buttons in order to piss them off or embarrass them. They're constantly sharing little glances, and in short, they are best friends. That's it. Though I would say their dynamic does shift at least slightly over the duration of the series, mostly due to how each of their characterizations shifted over time. At the beginning of the series, I'd argue that Henry was almost always the voice of reason between the two, given Liam's whole shtick. However, as Liam's humor got scaled back and Henry's quirkiness got scaled up, I'd say they end up switching who's in that role a lot more often, which I think is good because in the early episodes, it kind of feels like Henry is annoyed by Liam's presence a majority of the time they're together. They're always intended to be best friends, obviously, but by the end of the season, I'd say their relationship is a little closer and definitely the healthiest out of any of the friendships in the Jomies friend group. Liam, unfortunately, doesn't have that many popular theories surrounding him, but let's go through the few I have seen floating around. The backstory behind this one is that the creator once said Liam was TMF's vampire and that his favorite drink was red blood. I don't think it was meant to be taken all too seriously, and it probably won't be confirmed in universe to be true. I do kind of wish they did a little more with it in the show, though, because that is also something that could be a gimmick of his. But I also get why maybe they wouldn't go that route, since doing creepy things is sort of Sadie's whole deal, and giving Liam something similar to that might make Sadie's character stand out less. But there are vampire jokes you could do that don't include him having to be scary, so my point still stands. I honestly think this one's pretty plausible. I think the most likely outcome is that Liam and Henry stick together and end up leaving Drew somehow. The creator promised there would be a lot of Drew angst this season, and I'd be more surprised if this didn't happen than if it did. The main reason I think Henry and Liam will stick together is that along with them being best friends, they've also known each other for way longer, almost definitely years longer than they've known Drew. We know this because Liam and Henry definitely didn't know Drew in middle school. Along with them not being shown in the middle school flashbacks of episode 9, Henry also didn't know who Haley was in the comic episode, which wouldn't make much sense if they had been friends with Drew, since Drew was already harassing Haley by that point, and they would have definitely noticed her fail at the talent show. In that case, Henry and Liam definitely met Drew not too long before Jake did, and as such, didn't have much time to establish a dynamic as a trio before Jake was added, which, in my mind, makes it way more likely that instead of returning to an old dynamic, the friend group will just sort of crumble without Jake around. Drew added Jake to their group fairly soon after meeting Liam and Henry in order to keep himself sane, and I think he'll probably end up snapping and pushing them away now that Jake's gone. And I really don't think Henry and Liam would split up and choose Drew over each other when they've known each other for way longer than they've known him, so I'd say they're probably going to stick together. As for how the Dromies will split up, well, if Drew's not the one who snaps on them and it's actually Henry or Liam who ends up breaking it off, my bets are on Henry. He already seemed reluctant to leave Jake behind, and even though he doesn't like it when his friends fight, I think he'd be able to overcome that and tell Drew off if it came down to it. Liam, with his follower tendencies, I don't think would be able to pull the trigger and stand up to him, even if he wanted to. And even if he did get mad at Drew, I feel like he wouldn't want to start a fight about it when he knows it will upset Henry after seeing how Henry looked when they left Jake. But who knows? Now this one is an interesting one, because if any of the Dromies were to secretly be in this band, I do think it would be Liam. However, I have my doubts. For one, there's the meta side of things. Their creator has been pretty blatant about foreshadowing in the past, like how Leah's redemption was clearly being set up since episode 3, and I feel like there would have been a lot more hints towards this if this was the direction his character was going in. The biggest piece of evidence for this theory is probably the fact that Liam wouldn't admit who he was texting during Jake's speech in a deleted scene, but that scene was deleted. I don't think the creator would have taken it out for a little more drama if it included a key piece of foreshadowing that may never see the light of day unless they decided to release it. And that's really the only moment we have even slightly hinting to the fact that Liam might be hiding something, which it isn't enough for me to believe this theory. Especially since if Liam was secretly also in a band, I feel like his reaction to the breakup wouldn't have been as cold as it was. Like, he wasn't hostile like Drew, but I feel like he would have been a bit more understanding if he was in a really similar situation to him. Liam's reaction to the breakup generally seemed like he was annoyed at Jake for lying, but wasn't going to be that much of a jerk about it to his face since he understood where he was coming from at least a little bit. Of course, he wasn't going to immediately forgive him either, so instead he gave him a rather neutral response, saving his annoyance for when Jake couldn't see his face. While I don't think the line he says would be different if he were secretly in the same situation, I think the delivery and facial expression definitely would have been a little more sympathetic. But this theory is still really cool and definitely really interesting. I don't personally think it'll turn out to be true, but I'm kind of biased because I don't want it to be, in all honesty. I feel like it would make Liam's arc just a carbon copy of Jake's, which I don't love, but I can totally see why someone would believe this one. Before we start, I feel like I should clarify what the difference between a headcanon and theory actually is, at least to me. I think of it like this. Theories are ideas someone believes has evidence of being true within the show and reasonably could be confirmed canon. And a headcanon is something someone makes up about a character just for fun, even if canon doesn't have much to support it or actively contradicts it. With that cleared up, let's get into it. Okay, I actually have an unpopular opinion about this one. If someone were to force me to pick who I thought was the least likely to be straight out of Drew, Jake, Henry, and Liam, I would pick Liam, which I know sounds ridiculous, but hear me out. He has such strong aromantic coding to me. Like, think about it. He is the only person in his friend group to not have a confirmed love interest. Drew and Zoe have each other, Jake has Daisy, Henry has Leah, Leah has Jake. Meanwhile, Liam's got nothing. Unless you count Stacy's mom, but I don't because he only mentioned her once. Why does the wiki list her as a serious love interest? What? But anyways, the story goes out of its way to point out that he doesn't understand romance like the other characters do, with Jake and Henry criticizing him for not knowing how to be romantic. And since his one gimmick is him being girl-obsessed, you'd expect them to do more with it, like make him be more interested in literally any of the female cast, or maybe be more aware of the romance going on with his friends and realizing Jake probably likes Haley. But no, when Drew and Liam start thinking Jake's into Haley, Drew is the one to point it out, and Liam seems surprised. Liam just has a weird amount of general obliviousness to romance for a character so centered around it. And that's one of the things that I think did initially draw me to him. I'm also on the aromantic spectrum, so a character like this appeals to me, especially in TMF, where literally every other character has the same approach to romance, that being long-term crushing and a lot of unnecessary drama. Liam's different mindset was just really cool to me, I guess, and I like how it emphasizes his less emotional driven thinking, I suppose. So yeah, I love headcanoning that he's on the aromantic spectrum. I personally usually go for demi-romantic because even though I like shipping him, I want to preserve how he experiences romantic attraction different from most people. But I've also seen others headcanoning him as gay, which I will admit, I was confused about at first, because if there's any character who I thought was basically 100% confirmed to be attracted to women, for better or for worse, mostly worse, it was Liam. However, after considering it further, I think the idea of a bunch of people assuming that Liam's attraction to women is such a comedically large part of his character that he must be compensating for something is kind of hilarious to me. So even if I don't buy it, I respect this one. I think it's kind of funny. Okay, so I'm super biased on this one because I started shipping them before I knew this was a thing, and as such, I refuse to believe it's canon. And the reason I feel comfortable shipping them even after realizing this was a thing is because I think at most it's a headcanon, not a plausible theory. The source material definitely didn't intend for them to be siblings. Most obviously showing this is that they didn't go to the same middle school, which while not impossible in real life, would be a super weird choice to make if they were intended to be siblings. They also do not look similar at all, and I will die on this hill. Their eye colors are different, and their outfits have way different color schemes. Most crucially, Maria doesn't have freckles, which if they wanted to convey that her and Liam were siblings, the creator definitely would have made her have, since no other character has freckles besides Liam. Literally, their only similarities looks-wise is that they're both white brunettes, which you could also argue is not true since Maria has pink ends and Liam doesn't. The other pair of twins in TMF looks like this. If the creator intended for them to be siblings, we'd know. People are allowed to headcanon whatever they want, of course. This headcanon's just not for me, and since it has such contradictory evidence, I'm comfortable ignoring it. Especially since, hear me out, Maria and Liam would be such a good couple. They're so similar. They play the exact same role in their respective friend groups. They love annoying their friends. They're both relatively chill and easygoing. They would be such a good couple. I love them both so much. I pray for more Maria's screen time in season 2. Okay, so I thought I had more headcanons I wanted to talk about, but it was actually just those two. So let's move on to the conclusion. In conclusion, Liam may not be the most fleshed out character in TMF, but he's still really interesting, and I wish people talked about him a little more because there's a lot of stuff that can be discussed. He's got a little more going on than most people think, and in general, he's just fascinating to talk about since we know so little about him, and any characterization he does have is pretty subtle, which allows for a lot more fun speculation. Like, I didn't even get to cover how Liam manages to not say freak once in the whole season, which is so weird. I could probably make a whole video about that by itself. Or his ships, because his nature as always being a supporting role leads to him having such good dynamics with so many characters. If you made it here, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was at least a somewhat enjoyable experience. This is my first time creating anything on YouTube instead of just watching it, so sorry if there are any mistakes. If you want to see an analysis of any other characters, then feel free to comment suggestions. Though I can't promise I'll cover them, and if I do, the video definitely won't be this long. Any character is on the table for suggestions. Except Drew. Drew's so popular that there are a lot of people who've already made analyses about him way better than I ever could, and in all honesty, I really don't care for him as a character personally, so I probably wouldn't be able to give him the analysis he deserves anyway. But if you just want to see more in-depth Liam analysis, I would suggest checking out my Tumblr, because I've posted a lot of ramblings on there. Too many ramblings, some may argue. And with that, thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a good morning, evening, or night.